Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad that you are here. We as a church are going in the middle of a year-long journey through the book of the Bible called Romans. Now, Romans was written by a man named Paul, and Paul was one of Jesus' closest friends, but also one of his closest followers. And so he wrote a letter to the church in the city of Rome, and that's where we get the book of Romans. And so it's 16 chapters long, and we are walking through it verse by verse over the whole year. Now, so far, we've made it through chapters 1 and chapters 2, and now we're in chapter 3. And we've been using this illustration that there's a huge circle on the stage, and we call that the sin circle. In chapter 1, Paul says everybody who doesn't follow Jesus is in the sin circle. They're sinful. And all the people that follow Jesus go, yeah, they're horrible. They're the worst, right? And then chapter 2, he goes, and if you're a follower of Jesus, you are also in the sin circle. And they're like, what? Me? Yes, you, because we all sin. And what he says is everybody makes mistakes. Everybody sins. Everybody is in the sin circle. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, this series has been very convicting of my life because I tend to sometimes forget about my mistakes, but I'm really good at pointing out the mistakes of others. Anybody else? No, just me? Okay, all right. Yeah. It reminds me, when I first came to Southeast, I started off in junior high ministry. I was the middle school pastor, and I loved it. And one time we took a trip up to an amusement park north of Cincinnati, and I was in a 15-passenger van driving, and we were coming down 71 South, and the right-hand lane was deadlocked. It was just stopped because of construction that was going on. But the left-hand lane, the one I was in, was wide open, and we were traveling probably 35 or 40 miles an hour. So here I am in a van filled with a couple of volunteers and middle school kids who have been in a water park all day. And all of a sudden, this car darts out in front of me, slams on her brakes, and comes to a complete stop. And I hit my brakes, but I couldn't stop, and I hit the back of the car. Now, it wasn't that bad of an accident. In fact, I can tell you how bad it was. None of the airbags deployed. And when I got the van stopped and I said, how is everybody? There was a sixth grade boy from the back seat that said, why is he asking if everybody's okay? And the girl next to him said, because we just had a wreck, idiot. And he goes, oh, okay. You know, so, but I mean, we had a fender bender, okay? So after I made sure everybody was okay, I get out of the van and I walk up to the car in front of me to check on them to make sure they're okay. And a middle-aged woman gets out and I say, are you okay? This is how she answers me. Well, I've been trying to figure out how to get a new car and now you're going to buy me one. And I went, oh. Boy, I hit the wrong person, didn't I? You know, it was like that. Well, pretty soon the police came, so we got in our cars. Long story short, 4 years later, she sued the church and she sued myself. And I find myself in a courtroom in north of Cincinnati, in Lebanon, Ohio, for a week-long jury trial for this. And I remember I drove up the night before and I meet with our lawyer. Man, he's the lawyer you want. He was a bulldog. I'm like, this guy is going to get me off. It's going to be great. Like, it's going to be awesome. We had our plan of attack. We get to the courtroom the next morning, and they'd go through jury selection, and then we start, and they let the plaintiff attorney go first, and he stands up, and he starts making the case that I'm the guilty party. And he starts making about a minute and a half in, my lawyer is getting fidgety. I'm like, oh, man, this is going to get good. And finally, my lawyer stands up and says, Your Honor, if I may. He says, my client is guilty. He hit her. So can we move on? And the judge says, yeah, let's move on with the rest of the trial. And I'm like, what? What? What kind of lawyer are you? You're the worst. So we get to a break, and if I had sent him an email, it would have been strongly worded, but it wasn't emails in person. I said, what are you doing? Well, you're supposed to be here to get me off the charge. He goes, no. You hit her. You're guilty. He goes, all we're here to do is to determine what the damages are. I'm like, wow, I'm guilty, and we're just trying to figure out what the damages are. Well, today we're talking about and realizing that each one of us, in one way or another, to one extent or another, are guilty of sin, of making mistakes. And how do we determine the damages? And I have good news for you that God has made a way. Now, here's what I know. There's probably at least one person here who probably hadn't been to church in a while or been to church here in a while. And you're like, are you kidding me? The one week I decided to go to church, and the pastor's talking about guilt. I cannot believe it, you know. Here's what I want. Listen to me now and hear me later, okay? This is really important. I am not here to make anybody feel guilty. Do you want to know why? We're all guilty. We're already guilty. So my job is not to do that because it's already done. We're going to take a look at what God has to say about trading our guilt for the grace that he provides. Now, before we get into it, I think we need to kind of look at what the word guilt is. I did some study on the word guilt, and it actually is interesting because it has two different meanings, two different sides, like two sides of a coin. The one part of guilt is a fact. Okay? It's a truth, okay? You were speeding to church this afternoon because you slept in a little bit too much or the laundry didn't get done fast enough and you see the red and blue, woo, 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 lights, you get pulled over and get a ticket. You're guilty, right? You've done something wrong. I will never forget the first time I realized that I had done something wrong. I was 7 years old and I was shopping with my mom at a Kmart store. And we came down an aisle and turned the corner, and right there on the end cap was a huge display of Pez candy, all right? And anybody love Pez candy? Man, I love Pez. Grape is the best, okay? And so I said to my mom, Mom. Anybody, moms ever heard that before? Yeah, okay, you're with me, all right? I did that. And does it ever work? Never, but I tried it anyways. Mom, can I have some grape Pez? And she says, no, I'm not buying you grape Pez. And she went on. Well, I decided in that moment I wanted it. So I grabbed it off the shelf, I opened it up, I shoved it in my mouth, and I ate it as fast as I could, all that grape Pez. And then I caught up with my mom. I'm like, hey, Mom. She goes, hey, did you get any of that Pez? I'm like, no, why? She goes, well, if you did, grape Pez stains your tongue and your teeth and your lips. I went, really? I had grape Pez all over my mouth. I was literally caught grape-lipped, right? Purple-lipped. I was caught that way. And I remember my mom stopped shopping. She took me by the hand, and she took me all the way up to the front of Kmart to one of the cashiers, and she made me confess to the cashier that I had stolen Pez and asked for forgiveness, and then she took it out of my allowance for the next 2 weeks. But at 7 years old, I realized I am guilty. And I think we have to know that each one of us is guilty. You decide you're trying to eat healthy, right? You're trying to eat healthy, but these cute girls are selling Girl Scout cookies outside of Kroger, right? I mean, come on, it's for a good cause. So you buy just one box of your favorite kind of Girl Scout cookies, and you make a promise you're only going to eat one, maybe two at the most a day. And 2 days later, on your counter is an empty box of Girl Scout cookies. And you're like, I am getting rid of that dog, right? I mean, like, you've eaten it, right? You're guilty. You've done it. Or maybe you lose your temper with your family again, and you swore to yourself you wouldn't. Or you gossiped about someone and it came back. Or you told a lie about something at work and it came back on you. Guilt is a fact. But the other side of the coin is this, is that guilt is a feeling. We can feel guilty. You ever had to go into like a grocery store to buy something very specific and you go in and they don't have it, and so you just have to leave and go out because you're in a hurry, and you leave the grocery store? I don't know about you, but I feel guilty. Like I want to go, hey, they didn't have what I want. I'm not stealing anything. You can check my pockets. I'm good. Sometimes it's so bad, I'll buy like a pack of gum. So I'm like, yeah, I just came into Kroger to buy a pack of gum because that's the kind of guy you feel guilty about things like that. A few months ago, Jill and I had the opportunity to go on a pastor's retreat in Mexico. And when we're coming back into the United States, you go into U.S. Customs. Now, I need to tell you, part of the prerequisites for working for U.S. Customs is you have zero sense of humor, right? There's no joking. And there's like signs like, don't even think about it, Well, when they say that, I think about it, right? And you got to be serious. And I'm sitting there watching, I'm getting closer, and my heart is starting to beat because if this doesn't go well, I'm going to be like in some Mexican prison somewhere, okay? And you're like, hey, where's Michael? I don't know. He went on vacation and his wife came back, but, we don't know where he is. And so I just remember you walk up and you would give your passport to the customs agent, and then they would do one to say, look at your picture, and they look at you. And you're trying to look like, it's me. I've lost weight since then. I grew a beard, whatever. I changed my shirt. And then they look at it, and they look at you, and I was just getting more and more. I was feeling like I had done something wrong. And then they say, look into the camera here. Don't smile and act natural. And I'm like, And I got the twitch, And I'm like, I'm going to be arrested. I haven't done anything. I'm an American citizen, which is always what happens before they dogpile him and drag him away, right? Sometimes we feel guilty when we aren't. And a lot of us carry around that guilt. If your parents went through a divorce and you were a kid, you somewhere in your life probably thought, it's my fault. Here's what I want you to hear. It is not your fault. It's never the kid's fault. It's mom and dad's fault. But we carry around that guilt. Or maybe there was a friendship that we really treasured and it just went south and we take it upon ourselves and blame ourselves. Or maybe we're the victim of someone else's bad decisions. We carry around guilt. Guilt is a fact, but also guilt is a feeling that we have. So today we're going to try to talk about how we deal with our guilt. And we're going to take a look at two rationalizations that we use and one remedy that we have for our guilt. Now, I don't know about you, but as I wrote this sermon, it's kind of a sermon that God's been working in my life. So the first rationalization that I have, that I'm hoping, really hoping, some of you can relate to, is that I am not that bad. Like when I look at myself, I'm like, hey, I'm a good dude, right? I'm not that bad of a person. And we lose perspective and we're not able to see. We think our sin is like this big and other people's sin is this big. We're like, when I compare to them, I'm not that bad. There's a study that's called Adelson's checkerboard illustration. I want to show you how sometimes our perspective can be off. If you look at this, you look at the square that's marked A, and it's a dark square, right? This is the easy one, yes, right? Yes, okay. And if you look at B, it's a light square, right? It's obvious. A is dark and B is light. But when we change perspective and we connect them with the same color, look what we find out. They're actually the same color. The reason for that is our mind tricks us to thinking that this square is the same as this square, when really it's the same as this square. And we do the same thing with our guilt, is that we compare and go, well, I'm doing great. I mean, I'm way better than that guy. Or, at least I'm not as messed up as they are. And we rationalize by saying that we aren't that bad. And then, if you're like me, I start playing what I call the rationalization game. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. I'll compare myself. Well, I'm not as bad as them, or I'll justify what I do. Well, I had no choice. Like, I was forced into this. I had to do this. Like, the deadline was here, whether it was done or not, so I just said it was done and turned it in. Or I did really good on the project, but the last 5% I just kind of cheated on, but that's okay because I wanted to get a good grade, right? I mean, we feel like we can justify what we've done because we had no other choice. Or me, I have what I call selective memory, or Dory syndrome, okay? I just forget. Like, I did that? Oh, you definitely did that. My wife wants to have one of those challenge flags that she can throw and show the replay, But we have selective memory. We forget that we said something, or we forget that we did that, which then means when we compare ourselves to other people, we can justify our actions. Well, there is some good news in the middle of this. Here's the good news. It's not just something that we deal with. In fact, all the way back, Adam and Eve, at the beginning of humanity, they dealt with the same problem. And in fact, when Paul writes to the Romans, in Romans chapter 3, he's addressing this very issue. So why don't you guys take out your Bibles or your devices and turn to the book of Romans, and we're going to be in chapter 3. So Romans chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 9. Romans chapter 3, verse 9. Here's what Paul says about our guilt. Well then, should we conclude that we Jews are better than others? No, not at all. For we have already shown that all people, whether Jews or Gentiles, are under the power of sin. You see what Paul is saying here is that it doesn't matter if you feel like you're a follower of Jesus or you're not a follower of Jesus. We all are in the sin circle. But the interesting phrase right here is this one, the power of sin. And that phrase is very interesting because that word power means that sin has a weight or an authority or a control over us. What that means is there's no such thing as a little white lie. A sin is a sin. We can't say, oh, I'm just going to dip my toe into sin just to test it out and see what it's like. No, sin is a sin, and it quickly weighs us down. You take your first drink just to relax, but then it becomes a crutch that you need to cope on, and then it becomes a full-blown addiction. You click on the first website with pornography just out of curiosity to see what it's like, and then it becomes a replacement for a healthy marriage and becomes an addiction that consumes you. You have your first incident of road rage, and it becomes your demeanor every time you get in your vehicle. You put it on just like you put on your seatbelt. In fact, it gets to the point where your family doesn't even want to ride with you anymore because you're so out of control. And the truth is, we are all weighed down and under the control of sin at one time or another. But Paul doesn't let his foot off the gas. He really hits the gas here. Look what he says in verses 10, 11, and 12. I love this. Well then, should we conclude? Well, that's verse 9. 10, 11, 12. As the scriptures say, ready? Paul's going to get on a roll here. No one is righteous, not even one. No one is wise. No one is seeking God. All have turned away. All have become useless. No one does good, not a single one. What do you think Paul's trying to say here? What do you think? Yeah. He's saying all have sinned. And all means all. It's all y'all and all y'all. It's all of us, okay? All have sinned. There's no way around it. We're under the power of sin. But then Paul does something. He goes very specific, and he starts talking about specific sins. Look what he says in verses 13 and 14 as we go to this. It says, their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips, and their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. He starts talking about our words. And I was thinking this week, why would Paul focus on those very specific sins? And here's what I realized. Most of the time, when I do something that's wrong, it starts out by the words that I say. I mean, it says here that their throats are open graves. Have you ever been around like a dead animal or something, and that smell that just comes out, you're just like, oh, get away. Have you ever been around a person that every time they talk, they are just running people down, or they're foul-mouthed, or you're just like, I don't even want to be around you. Or people who practice deceit, they lie all the time. Or maybe their words, they're just spitting gossip and venom on people all the time. And the people who curse and are just filled with bitterness, those are people who you just don't even want to be around. I mean, you're probably thinking of somebody right now that's like that. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to see him tomorrow at work or this afternoon at home. Maybe, I don't know, you know. If you can't think of somebody like that, there's a good chance you might be that person, where our words just spill out and cause us to sin and cause problems for everybody under that power of sin. Well, Paul goes on in verses 17 and 18, and look what he says here. He wraps it up with this real simple statement. The way of peace, they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. They don't fear God. Their life is chaos, and everybody that gets sucked into the vortex around them is sucked into that. So the first realization, the first rationalization that we use is, I'm not that bad. But I think we've just made the case from the Bible that that's not true. But the second case is that the second rationalization, I do more good things than bad things. Wouldn't it be great if God gave us a heavenly debit card? And when you do something good, man, some stuff gets deposited in there and your account starts going up. And when you do something bad, they take a little bit out here and there depending on what it is. And as long as you have a positive balance, you're like, God, I'm good. Doesn't that sound great? It does. Do more than good. It's a great idea. There's just one problem. It's not true. It's not true. We want it to be true. We live as if it's true. But the Bible says it is not true. In fact, it talks about how the law doesn't make us feel better about ourselves. The law makes us feel worse about ourselves. Look what it says in Romans chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. It says, obviously, like, duh, right? The law applies to those to whom it was given, for its purpose is to keep people from having excuses. In other words, there's no excuse. You either drive the speed limit or you're breaking the speed limit, right? You're either doing what's right or you're not. And to show that the entire world is guilty before God, once again, all have sinned. Everybody's in a sin circle. For no one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. Let me say that again. No one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. We can never be good enough to earn our way into God's love. Maybe you heard the story of the man who was a good man, and he retired. And all of his life, he had done a lot of good things. He volunteered in the community, and he donated to charities. He, whenever anybody needed to move, he would show up on Saturday morning with his pickup truck. I mean, this was a good man. And so he decided when he retired, he was going to take an international vacation because he deserved it. He's like, I have been good my whole life. And so he shows up at the airport, and he is so excited. He goes, man, I have been such a good guy my whole life. I deserve this vacation. So he gets in line, and he's going, you know what, man, I have given to charity. I haven't cheated anybody. I've donated money. I even went to middle school camp. I mean, like, I am up there. You know what I mean? Like, I have earned it. And he said, because I've earned it, I don't even need a plane ticket. I just deserve this vacation. So he gets up to the ticket collector at the gate. They say, I need your ticket. And he goes, oh, it's okay. You don't know. You don't know. It's okay. I'm a really good person. I mean, I have been married to my wife for 50 years. I coach Little League. I give money. I mean, I do everything. So you don't understand this, but I don't need a ticket because I've done so much good that I deserve this vacation. Ticket taker says, well, that's not exactly how it works. Everybody needs a plane ticket, no exceptions. And the man turned around, he walked away, and he said, but I'm a good man. I deserve this. And he left without being able to go on his vacation. Now, we laugh at that story, don't we? Because we know to get on an airplane, you need an airline ticket. But why do we laugh at that story, and then we turn around to God, and we say the same thing? Well, God, I'm a good person. Like, I moved to the 12:15 service so more people at 10:30 could find Jesus. Right? Plus, parking is way better, but don't worry about that. Way better. God, I teach in the nursery those little babies about you every week. That earns me some, right? Why is it we laugh at a guy who thinks he's so good he doesn't need a plane ticket? But in our own life, we say, God, I'm good enough. I deserve this. Again, it's a great idea, but it's not the truth. The Bible is very clear that all of us sit in the sin circle. So we've got two rationalizations that I'm not that bad and I do more good than God, more good than bad. But what's the remedy? Here's the remedy for our guilt. It's God's grace. Look at what it says in Romans chapter 3, verse 21. It says this, but now I want to stop right there because for 2.5 chapters, we have just been getting the truth put on us that we are sinners. Like, I got it already. 6 weeks, all we've heard is, we're in the sin circle. I got it. But all of a sudden, these two words come flying out of the Bible that change everything. If this was a movie, the soundtrack would change because you know the hero is about to arrive. We are in the sin circle, but now God has shown us a way to be made right with him without having to keep the requirements of the law. God's shown us a way. And if you're like me, I'm like, God, what is that way? Tell me what the way is. I want to know. I'm in the sin circle. I don't deserve your forgiveness. What is the way that you have given? And in the next verse of the Bible, I love it. The Bible gives us the answer. Here is what the way is. Are you ready for this in verse 22? It says this, we are made right with God. Yes, how? By placing our faith in Jesus Christ. And this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who we are. Do you get that? The way out of the sin circle, the way to trade in our guilt for God's grace is we get to place our faith in Jesus. It's our choice. He isn't forcing us to love him. We get a choice. And just as everybody is in the sin circle, this verse gives us a great truth when it says this, that this truth is for everyone who believes. So everyone is guilty, but in the same way. Everyone that chooses Jesus is going to have God's grace. I don't know about you, but I love that because there have been times in my life when I don't believe that I deserve God's love and God's grace. I say to God, God, if you knew the things that I would do, you couldn't. And then I realize, oh, he knows. Well, God, if you knew what I was thinking in my heart, there's no way. And then I realize he knows, right? God knows. God knows. And he's provided the way. And in case we didn't get it the first 100 times through it, look at what verse 23 and 24 say. He goes one more time. For everyone has sinned and all fall short of God's glorious standards. Yet in God, in his grace, freely makes us right in his sight. He did this through Christ Jesus when he freed us from the penalty of our sin. You see, here's the absolute truth. Is that God says to go to heaven, you have to be sinless. But we sin all the time. We make mistakes all the time. To use our illustration, we live in the sin circle. But Jesus lived. He came to earth and had a perfect life. He never sinned. When he was crucified, he was buried in a tomb for 3 days, and then he conquered death and came back to life, and his death, burial, and resurrection is the sacrifice for our mistakes. He paid the price. Jesus is the way through. God's righteousness comes through our faith, it says in verse 22, that we become right because of what Jesus did. When I was in a children's church as a little kid growing up, I remember one time they taught us a song that taught us the definition of grace. And it took the first letter of grace, made an acrostic, and it gave me a way to remember what grace means. So grace, when you look at it, stands for God's riches at Christ's expense. I get heaven because of what Jesus did. God's riches, I get to experience that because of Christ's expense, that he died on the cross for us. Now here's what I love. I love the fact that we know we're in the sin circle and we live there. But God has provided grace, a way through where we can have eternity with him. But I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes I wonder, what does that look like? Like in everyday life, what does that look like? Well, I want you to listen to the testimony of a young lady named Bree that goes to our Blankenbaker campus, and I really believe you're going to get to see in first person what it's like to trade in guilt for grace.
I grew up to a teenage mother. We didn't have a foundation of God at all. I was 13 the first time I tried alcohol and drugs, and 15 when I was heavily drinking. Full-blown alcoholic. My parents terminated their parental rights and I became a warden of the state. I got pregnant very young with my oldest son at 18. At that point in time, I found out my parents found God through Southeast Christian Church, and that bothered me because I felt abandoned and alone, and I couldn't believe with all what our childhood looked like that they could just be better. When I was 26, I had come to the end of my rope of alcoholism and addiction. I was contemplating suicide. I was looking down the barrel of a 9mm, and it was like those foxhole prayers, like, give me one reason not to pull this trigger. And there was a knock on the door at the house I was at. It was my sister, and I could see in her face, like, she looked so scared because I was just so out of control. I don't think they were expecting me to surrender and like, yeah, I need help. They took me to Southeast Blankenbaker campus. The care ministry paid for me to go to rehab for 60 days. alcoholism is a God-sized hole that you try to fill with everything but God, right? And so in early recovery, when I still wasn't fully surrendering to that idea, I used a man to fill that hole. I met him at a recovery meeting. He knew all the wonderful things to say to me that just swooped me off my feet. We very quickly moved in together. I got pregnant very quickly. I found out he was using drugs again. I was back into the can't believe this is happening to me again. It was straight back into the victim mentality. And I was gonna do everything in my power to keep it hidden so that I could prove something different to everybody. I think shame was the driving force behind wanting to keep everything hidden. It's just all these lies in my mind that in the time I really believed them. That relationship became quickly very abusive, physically, sexually, emotionally, all of it. It was the darkest time in my life. I was broken down to nothingness. When my middle son was 2 months old, I found out I was pregnant again with my youngest daughter. Maya was born, and I remember sitting on the couch, feeding her. I remember very vividly looking down at her, and she was just so innocent and beautiful, this little girl. I remember feeling terrified. And there was something about a little girl, like just holding her. I never wanted her to go through anything that I was going through. I mean, I was at a place in my mind of like, either I wanted to die or I was gonna be killed. Like, that was the severity of the abuse that I was enduring. I didn't want that for my daughter. And right, like underneath her head on the couch was a Jesus Calling book. And I knew in that moment, I was like, yeah, we're gonna go. And so I waited for a moment in time that it would be safe to get up and go. And that is what we did. It was me and all 3 kids in a diaper bag. We got in the car. I didn't have much gas, and I only had like a couple dollars. And because I left so suddenly, my kids were hungry, my daughter needed to be fed. Like, I really didn't know what to do. So that is why I chose to call my mom. I said, I left, we have nowhere to go. And all she said, she said, just come home. And my parents, it was a Thursday night, and they said, we're gonna go to church. You wanna come? I went to church, not really expecting to get much out of it. I was just so desperate. It was in the worship music. I remember standing there, super skeptical and timid and confused at the joy of all these people. And I started listening to this song, and it was the song, Same God. And I was like, okay, it's the same God whose favor rests upon the lowly, you know? And I remember going up to the altar, and all these walls that I had worked so hard to build up around me and my heart just came crashing down. Like, I didn't even have a choice in the matter. It just crashed. And I remember feeling so blanketed with this love and this like overwhelming peace. It did not make sense. And I had a thought, and the thought was, just come closer, my child. And I knew that was Jesus. That was Jesus. Here I was in total brokenness, messy, suffering, miserable. My thoughts were so dark. How could I feel like this and think like this and feel that kind of love? I mean, it was so abundant. Somebody had put their hand on my shoulder. It was like, for the first time, my messy, my broken didn't scare the people around me, you know, and they didn't need to ask questions. They didn't. They just were beacons of light. The pastor told me, he said, this is gonna help so many people. And he said it with like the most cheerful smile ever. Like, this is gonna help so many people. And I was like, I will never use this to help anybody. I really thought I was like this unique case of pain and suffering, you know, because I was still bound by shame. And it was right after that, he said, hey, I got something for you. It was the Holy Bible, God's holy word. And I just remember standing there like, I couldn't believe that someone thought I was worthy of a Bible. And I swear it was because of the belief of those people that I was like, I think I'm gonna read that thing. So I started with Matthew, and I just started reading through and just realized, like, the Gospels are the good news, you know? They're stories of redemption and resurrection and reconciliation, and then it all clicked for me. The truth of the word started resonating with my soul is when true healing really began. My kids get a present, sober mother. We're surrounded by awesome people. I was so riddled with fear and shame that I just didn't see how any of my pain was gonna help anybody. Today, I am set free. I am made new. My thoughts have been transformed. I am a spiritual life coach for addiction recovery care at Eagle Creek. Now that I have allowed my pain and my past to be used for good, the highest good of the kingdom, I've had the privilege of baptizing over 50 women in the last 90 days. I get to go straight into the pits of hell with other people and say, hey, I will walk through this with you. We cannot do it alone, but I know a guy. His name is Jesus.